In 1877, railroad workers across America went on strike. They blocked tracks, they stopped trains. They paralyzed commerce in 14 states. The strike lasted 45 days. President Hayes deployed federal troops. Over 100 people died. And one man, who wasn't even alive anymore, had created the system that caused it all. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He died 3 months before the strike began. But the monopoly he built, the labor practices he pioneered, the competitive tactics he perfected, they triggered the largest labor uprising in American history up to that point. Vanderbilt didn't just build railroads. He invented a business model that would define American capitalism for 150 years. Monopolize transportation, control prices, crush competition, exploit workers, and accumulate wealth on a scale that makes modern billionaires look modest. When Vanderbilt died in January 1877, he was worth $105 million. That's $2.7 billion today. But adjusted for the size of the economy, it was equivalent to $230 billion. Richer than anyone alive today, except perhaps Elon Musk. And he built that fortune using tactics that are still being deployed right now. Let me show you exactly how Vanderbilt's method works, why it caused the Great Railroad Strike, and why you're still living in the transportation monopoly he created. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born May 27, 1794, on Staten Island, New York. His parents were poor farmers. He had almost no formal education. He quit school at 11 years old, but Vanderbilt understood one thing that would make him the richest man in America. Whoever controls transportation controls everything. Because goods don't move themselves. People don't move themselves. If you control how things move, you control commerce. And if you control commerce, you control wealth. Vanderbilt started with ferries. In 1810, at age 16, he bought a small sailboat and started a ferry service between Staten Island and Manhattan. He undercut competitors on price. He worked longer hours. He provided better service. Within a few years, he controlled most of the ferry traffic in New York Harbor. But ferries were small. The real opportunity was steamboats. In the 1820s, steamboat transportation was dominated by a legal monopoly granted by New York State to Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston. They controlled all steamboat traffic in New York waters. This monopoly made them rich and made transportation expensive. Vanderbilt hated monopolies when he didn't own them. So he broke it. Vanderbilt started running steamboats illegally. The monopoly sued him. He ignored them and kept operating. His prices were half theirs. Customers chose Vanderbilt. The monopoly sued again. Vanderbilt countersued. The legal battle went to the Supreme Court. In 1824, Gibbons v. Ogden, the Supreme Court ruled that states couldn't grant monopolies on interstate commerce. Vanderbilt won. The Fulton-Livingston monopoly was destroyed. And Vanderbilt learned a critical lesson. Legal monopolies are fragile, but operational monopolies built through ruthless competition are invincible. Through the 1830s and 1840s, Vanderbilt dominated steamboat transportation on the Hudson River, Long Island Sound, and eventually coastal routes to Boston and Providence. His method was always the same. Enter a route where competitors charged high prices. Cut prices dramatically, often below cost. Drive competitors into bankruptcy. Buy their boats for pennies. Raise prices back up once competition was eliminated. This wasn't innovation. This was predation. And it worked perfectly. But Vanderbilt understood that steamboats had a limit. They were confined to water. The future was railroads. Rails could go anywhere. They could connect every city, every factory, every farm. Whoever controlled the rails would control the entire economy. So in the 1850s, Vanderbilt began buying railroads. He was 60 years old. Most men retire at 60. Vanderbilt built his greatest empire. His first acquisition was the New York and Harlem Railroad in 1857. It was small and unprofitable. Vanderbilt restructured it, improved service, and made it profitable. Then he bought the Hudson River Railroad, then the New York Central Railroad. By 1867, Vanderbilt controlled 3 major railroads connecting New York City to Buffalo and the Great Lakes. But owning 3 separate railroads wasn't efficient. So Vanderbilt did something revolutionary. He merged them. The New York Central and Hudson River Railroad became one company. This created the first major railroad consolidation in American history, and it established the template for corporate mergers for the next century. The merger gave Vanderbilt vertical integration of the entire New York to Great Lakes route. He controlled every mile of track. He set all the prices. He decided which freight got priority. And most importantly, he could prevent competitors from accessing his rails. If you wanted to ship goods from New York to Chicago, you had to use Vanderbilt's railroad. There was no alternative. He had created a transportation monopoly. And monopolies charged monopoly prices. Freight rates on Vanderbilt's lines were 40% higher than on competitive routes. Farmers in upstate New York paid more to ship grain 100 miles than farmers in Illinois paid to ship 500 miles. Why? Because Illinois had competing railroads. Upstate New York had only Vanderbilt. He could charge whatever he wanted. And he did. When farmers complained, Vanderbilt reportedly said, "The public be damned. I'm working for my stockholders." This quote became infamous. It perfectly captured the Vanderbilt philosophy: profit over people, shareholders over society, monopoly over competition. But Vanderbilt's true genius wasn't just building monopolies, it was defending them. In 1868, he fought what became known as the Erie War. Jay Gould and Jim Fisk controlled the Erie Railroad, competing line from New York to the Great Lakes. Vanderbilt wanted to buy Erie and eliminate the competition, started buying Erie stock. Gould and Fisk responded by printing millions of shares of fraudulent stock and selling it to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt bought $7 million worth of Erie stock, only to discover that Gould and Fisk had diluted his holdings to nothing. The stock was worthless. Vanderbilt got a court order to arrest Gould and Fisk for fraud. They fled to New Jersey, outside New York jurisdiction. Then they bribed New York state legislators to legalize the fraudulent stock issuance retroactively. Vanderbilt couldn't arrest them. He couldn't sue them. They had bought the legislature. So Vanderbilt did the only thing that made sense. He negotiated. Gould and Fisk agreed to buy back Vanderbilt's Erie stock at near original price. Vanderbilt agreed not to pursue criminal charges. Both sides paid massive bribes to legislators to ratify the deal. And everyone walked away richer, except the public, who watched their government being bought and sold openly. The Erie War taught Vanderbilt another lesson. Legal structures are malleable. Legislators can be purchased. Laws can be changed. The real power isn't in courts. It's in capital and political connections. So Vanderbilt invested heavily in both. He donated to political campaigns. He hired former politicians as railroad executives. He made sure that the people writing transportation regulations were people who owed him favors. This is regulatory capture. The regulated industry controls the regulators. Vanderbilt didn't invent it, but he perfected it at scale. By 1877, Vanderbilt's railroad empire stretched from New York to Chicago. He controlled over 4,500 miles of track. His railroads employed over 40,000 workers, and those workers were treated as expendable resources. Railroad work in the 1870s was brutal. Workers laid track in all weather. They loaded freight manually. They worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Injuries were common. Deaths were frequent. And pay was constantly being cut. Because Vanderbilt's railroads, like all railroads, had enormous fixed costs. Track maintenance, locomotives, stations, all required constant capital investment. So when revenue declined, railroads cut the one variable cost they could control: labor. In 1873, America entered a severe economic depression. Railroad revenues collapsed. Vanderbilt's New York Central cut worker wages by 10%. Then another 10%. Workers protested. They were ignored. Other railroads followed Vanderbilt's lead. Baltimore and Ohio cut wages. Pennsylvania Railroad cut wages. The pattern was always the same. Profits decline. Cut wages, maintain dividends for shareholders. When workers complained, the response was uniform. Be grateful you have a job. By July 1877, railroad workers had endured 4 years of wage cuts while watching shareholders receive dividends. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad announced another 10% wage cut. Workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia, went on strike. They stopped trains. They blocked tracks. Within days, the strike spread. Pittsburgh, Chicago, St. Louis, Baltimore, workers across the country walked off. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 had begun. And it started because Vanderbilt and other railroad magnates had created a system where workers had no power, no recourse, and no alternative but to strike. The strike was violent. In Pittsburgh, state militia fired on strikers, killing 20 people. Strikers responded by burning railroad property. Over 100 locomotives destroyed. Rail yards burned. President Rutherford Hayes deployed federal troops for the first time in American history to break a labor strike. Federal soldiers protected railroad property and forced workers back to their jobs at gunpoint. The strike ended after 45 days. Workers returned to work. Wages remained cut. Dividends continued. And the lesson was clear. Capital wins, labor loses. The government protects capital. Vanderbilt died in January 1877, 3 months before the strike began. But the system he built caused it. The monopoly that eliminated competition. The wage cuts that maximized profit. The political connections that ensured government support. The treatment of workers as disposable. All Vanderbilt innovations. All still standard practice today. When Vanderbilt died, his estate was worth $105 million. He left $95 million to his oldest son, William. He left token amounts to his other children. This created one of the first major inheritance battles in American history. The excluded children sued. They argued that Vanderbilt was mentally incompetent when he wrote his will. The case went to trial. William settled out of court, paying his siblings a fraction of what they claimed. But the estate remained largely intact. And William used that fortune to expand the empire further. William Vanderbilt ran the railroad empire for just 8 years before he died in 1885. But in those 8 years, he doubled the fortune to $200 million. How? By applying his father's methods more efficiently. He consolidated more railroads. He raised rates further. He cut wages deeper. And when workers struck, he broke the strikes with hired security forces and government troops. William Vanderbilt made one honest admission that his father never did. When asked about the public good, William said, "The public be damned. I work for my stockholders." It wasn't a misquote. It was company policy. The Vanderbilt fortune peaked with William's generation. His children divided the wealth. They built mansions. The Breakers in Newport, Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, 645th Avenue in Manhattan. They spent money faster than railroads could generate it. By the 1940s, the Vanderbilt fortune was largely dissipated. The last great Vanderbilt mansion was sold in 1948, when 120 Vanderbilt descendants gathered for a family reunion in 1973. Not one of them was a millionaire. The fortune was gone. But the system remained. The monopolistic practices Vanderbilt pioneered didn't die with the fortune. They evolved and spread. Every railroad baron after Vanderbilt used his playbook. J.P. Morgan consolidated railroads using Vanderbilt's methods. E.H. Harriman bought railroads and cut wages exactly like Vanderbilt. The tactics became industry standard. And when railroads declined, the tactics moved to other industries. Airlines use Vanderbilt's hub-and-spoke monopoly model. Delta controls Atlanta. United controls Chicago. American controls Dallas. You can't fly most routes without connecting through their hub. They control pricing. They cut labor costs. They lobby for government protection. It's the Vanderbilt model with planes instead of trains. Freight companies use the same consolidation tactics. UPS and FedEx dominate package delivery. They've bought competitors. They've cut wages through contract labor. They've lobbied against unionization. When workers strike, they hire replacements. The government protects their operations, exactly like the 1877 railroad strike, except now it's legal and normalized. Ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft use Vanderbilt's predatory pricing. Enter a market, price below cost. Drive out taxi companies. Once competition is eliminated, raise prices. Cut driver pay. Workers who complain are classified as independent contractors with no labor protections. It's the transportation monopoly updated for the gig economy. Even Amazon uses Vanderbilt's method. Amazon doesn't just sell products, it controls logistics. It owns warehouses, delivery trucks, and last-mile infrastructure. It sets prices for shipping. Third-party sellers must use Amazon's logistics network or lose visibility on the platform. It's a transportation monopoly disguised as an e-commerce platform. Vanderbilt would recognize it immediately. The Vanderbilt method has three core components. First, control the infrastructure. Rails, trucks, planes, warehouses, it doesn't matter. Own the physical network that moves goods and people. Second, eliminate competition through predatory pricing, acquisitions, or political influence. Create a situation where customers have no alternative. Third, extract maximum profit by cutting labor costs and raising prices once monopoly is established. These three steps have generated trillions in wealth over 150 years. And they're still being executed today. What makes Vanderbilt different from other robber barons is the clarity of his model. Rockefeller built complexity into his monopoly. Carnegie built technological innovation into his. Morgan built financial structures, but Vanderbilt built pure, simple control. Own the roads, charge whatever you want, pay workers as little as possible. It's brutal, it's efficient, and it's been replicated in every transportation industry since. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was the first major confrontation between monopoly capital and organized labor in America. It failed. Workers went back to work with wages cut, but it established a pattern that continues today. Workers organize, they strike. Companies hire replacements or lobby for government intervention. The government sides with capital. Workers lose. The cycle repeats. Every major labor confrontation since 1877 follows this pattern. The Pullman Strike of 1894, broken by federal troops. The Steel Strike of 1919, broken by private security and government force. The Air Traffic Controller Strike of 1981, broken by President Reagan firing every striker. The system Vanderbilt built, where capital uses government power to suppress labor, remains intact. It's legal, it's accepted, and it's bipartisan. Republican and Democratic administrations have both deployed this playbook. Cornelius Vanderbilt died 148 years ago. But his method controls your life right now. Every time you pay for shipping, you're paying monopoly prices set by companies using Vanderbilt's consolidation tactics. Every time transportation workers strike, you watch the government protect corporate interests exactly like 1877. Every time a company cuts wages while paying dividends, that's Vanderbilt's playbook in action. The fortune disappeared. The mansions were sold. But the system became permanent. It's embedded in corporate law, labor regulations, and political structures. And understanding this system is how you understand modern capitalism. This is what Histofund does. We show you the patterns that powerful people don't want you to see. The systems built by Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie that still extract wealth from you every single day. If this video showed you how one man's transportation monopoly became the template for modern corporate control, subscribe to Histofund, because the past isn't history. It's the instruction manual for the present. Next episode, we're exposing how the Astor family turned Manhattan real estate into a 200-year dynasty, and why you're still paying rent using their system. Subscribe now. History isn't academic, it's profitable.